Welcome back, everybody. Prof. Bowden here again, continuing our HTML and CSS website series. Today, we'll be tackling some exciting new CSS options: margin, padding, and float. We'll also finally start taking on the content area of our web page. As always, I've got my trusty editor up here on the left and my web browser with my page opened up over here on the right. You may notice that I've added a bunch of text here in my content area since last time. This is for illustrative purposes only, so you don't need to add that. If you want to, though, go ahead and put the text into the div element with the class content. Pause the video now while you do this. Now, you may have been unhappy with our header after last time. Sure, it stands out, but it sure doesn't look like much of a header. It's too thin, and it even has a white gap at the top. We'll take care of that right now, learning some new tools in the process. The reason that we have that white bar at the top is that the heading 1 element we use for our text has its own built-in margin at the top, meaning that it basically pushes away from the top of the other div. To get it to move to the top, we need to get rid of that space. However, we don't want to style just the h1 element, because that would affect every h1 tag that we might put on our page. We need to be more specific. Make sure you are in your CSS page in the editor and click to the right of the ending curly bracket for the header class entry. Hit enter. We could make a specific ID for this element and style that. There's another way though, because CSS lets us be pretty specific in our selection of elements. This time, we'll start with our .header, just like we did to identify the header class above. Instead of doing brackets next, though, we're going to hit space and type in h1. Now we'll do our open and closed curly brackets. This tells the browser that we're looking for h1 elements specifically within anything with the header class. In a way, this is like a mailing address, where you are looking for a particular street address within a city within a state. Now that we have an entry for it, it's time to start styling. First, let's get rid of that top margin. To do this, type margin-top, 0px, semicolon. This removes the margin just from the top. We could also style other margins using CSS, but this one will do for now. Save your work and refresh your page in the browser. The white bar should now be gone. However, that red line is still a bit thin for a page header, so let's make it a bit thicker. Back to the CSS. Click to the right of the last styling we did for the header class and hit enter. We'll add a new bit of style to this to get the size we want. In this new space, type height, 100px, semicolon. This changes the height of our div with the header class to that size. You may find that you need to play around with the heights sometimes until you really get a solid feel for what these px or pixel distances mean on the screen. If we save and refresh, we'll see that we have increased the height of our div, but our text remains up at the top. Let's move that down a bit by editing our CSS some more. If we try to change the margin on the h1 element to push it down, we'll just push our div down with it. We could fix this using the style to dictate the positioning of the elements, but that's a bit further down the road from where we are now. For now, let's tackle another new tool: padding. Padding is like margin in reverse. Instead of going on an element to push away from the things outside of it, we use padding on an element to push on the things inside of it. Here's a diagram of these in action. If we look at the margin example, we can see that the div pushes itself away from the line at the top. Note that the arrow represents pushing, not moving. The line at the top stays stationary, and the margin creates the gap between them. The height of the div does not change. In our padding example, we see that the div stays with the solid line, but pushes down against the text inside of it. Depending on how we've styled the rest of the div element, padding can change the height of the element. Let's put this to use on our page. In our CSS, click next to the height we just added to the header class and hit enter. In this new space, type in padding-top: 50px semicolon. Again, we could style other padding as well, but adding the dash top makes it specific to the padding at the top of the div. This pushes down on the text, moving it further away from the top. If we save and refresh, we can see that this has pushed our text away from the top, but it has also made our div larger than we wanted. Again, there are other ways to prevent this, but let's stick with the tools we have so far. Back in the CSS, we need to account for the extra 50 pixels that we've added by using the padding. Luckily, we can take it out of the height, as the padding is adding to that by pushing the text down. If we take 50 pixels worth of padding out of our 100 pixel height, we get a new height of 50 pixels. Make the change, save, and refresh. Now we have a header at the top of the page that is appropriately sized and has text down toward the bottom. Again, you may choose to play around with these tools if you don't like the aesthetic. It's your web page after all. One more change for today. It's time to make our link sidebar an actual sidebar. If we look at the HTML, we see that we have a class already assigned to our sidebar, side menu. This is what we'll be using to style in the CSS. Click over to the CSS and let's create an entry for the side menu class. If you remember how to do that, pause the video and try it out. To create this entry, we'll click after the closed bracket of our links class entry and hit enter. Then type .side menu and open and closed brackets. First, we'll put a border around our side menu. This will let us see what the changes we're making look like. Let's toss in a 1 pixel solid black border. Type border: 1px space black space solid semicolon. In our browser, we can see that this side menu div goes all the way across the screen. This is hardly what we want for a side menu. Let's go back to the CSS. After the border we just created, hit enter and we'll style the width of this div to keep it from going all the way across the page. Type in width: 150px semicolon. If we save and refresh, we see that our div now doesn't go all the way across the screen. The problem is that it still isn't a sidebar. We need a way to get the text of the content to line up next to it. Back in the CSS, we're going to learn our last new tool for today, float. This pulls out an element to allow us to send it off to the side of the other elements instead of appearing above them. Click to the right of our side menu width and hit enter. Since we want our sidebar on the left of the content, we'll type in float: left semicolon. Save and refresh. Well, we've got our side menu on the left, but as you can see, my practice text swings down below it. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I'd rather have everything line up nice and neat. I'd also rather have my text get a little buffer against this side menu. Also, depending on the size of your window, you might be seeing a side menu that runs right out the bottom of the page. We'll fix all these things in the CSS. Now, let's make our content line up the way we want it, preventing it from wrapping around the bottom of the side menu div. If we check the HTML, we see that our content is in a div element with the class content. Let's flip to our CSS and use that to style it. Create an entry for the content class as we always would. Since you've done a lot of these by now, I won't keep repeating the steps aloud. However, you can always pause the video if you aren't certain about the text and copy what I have done. Now we'll use margin left to create the visual space we want. Since the side menu has a width of 150 pixels, we'll want at least that much for the margin. Let's leave a little extra space though and give it a margin of 160 pixels. While we're at it, let's leave 10 pixels on the right side as well to make sure we don't run too close to the border of our page. We'll create that with the margin right and our value of 10 pixels. Do not forget your semicolons. Save and refresh one last time. Now you can see that we've got a centered page with a fixed width along with a floating side menu that appears appropriately to the left of our content. Next time, we'll close out our regular series by tidying up our top and side menu bars. After that, it's time for bonus CSS videos. See you later.